So, what did it all mean, and what happens now? This is Question Time. A big welcome to our audience at home and here, and to our panel, the Conservative Cabinet Minister Francis Maude, Labour's Alistair Campbell, former Director of Communications for Tony Blair, the Deputy First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney of the SNP, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, chair of his party's election campaign, Paddy Ashdown, and the broadcaster and columnist, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you very much. I should just say we did, of course, invite UKIP to be here tonight, particularly in view of the election results, but nobody was available to come. I should also say, if you want to text or tweet, our hashtag is BBCQT. Follow us at BBC Question Time. Text comments to 83981, and the red button shows what others are saying. And just before we start, you may have heard Paddy Ashdown say on television earlier today that he would eat his hat.
You're going to present me with one, I know.
He would eat his hat. Don't wait for it.
It's so predictable.
Wait for it. He would eat his hat if the poll, the exit poll, was right. It was. He then added the rider he'd eat it if it was made of marzipan. Question Time is a special presentation for you, Paddy.
How
Paddy Ashdown here.
How very
Just hold on a second, we have another presentation. Alistair Campbell said that if the SNP got 58, he'd eat his kilt. They got 56. We thought that was near enough. So we've got an edible kilt for...
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Can I just say, as someone who is absolutely devoted to chocolate, I'm very happy to help Paddy and Alistair out.
Right. And can I just say that I've been offered, I think, about 70 hats on Twitter so far, and that is the nicest of them.
Good. Right. Well, they may melt during the programme, and we may have to move them off. But let's go on to our first question now. It comes from Jasmine Osman, please. Jasmine Osman.
Yes. Does the SNP's landslide now make Scottish independence inevitable?
Does the landslide in Scotland make Scottish independence inevitable? Francis Maude.
No, I don't think so, and I hope not. I think we're strong as a United Kingdom, and I think we'd be much weaker if we stopped being a United Kingdom. So I really hope it won't happen. It was an amazing result in Scotland, and there was something happening which no one had spotted 6 months ago. I think most people thought in the aftermath of the quite firm rejection of independence in the referendum last September that actually the thing would die down, but the SNP took on a new lease of life from that and fought a very impressive campaign which swept particularly the Labour Party away in front of it. I think the lesson for all of the UK parties is we need to engage more. I'm very proud of the campaign that Ruth Davidson led for the Conservatives in Scotland. She was vigorous and effective, and I'm delighted that, agreed we started from a low base in Scotland, but we retained that base.
Yeah, well, let's not go into what happened in Scotland to the Tories. Let's deal with the question, which is you now have a majority in the House of Commons. Yes. What are you going to do?
Well, what we're going to do
Scotland.
What we're going to do is, in conjunction with the other UK parties, is make absolutely sure we deliver on the pledge that we all made during the referendum campaign. And so there will be a genuine further devolution settlement, which is a generous one, because with that autonomy has to come responsibility for the affairs of Scotland. So, is it inevitable? Absolutely not. But there's a real job for all of the UK parties to do to rebuild. And I think the elections next year for the Holyrood Scottish Parliament give an opportunity for there to be a very vigorous debate around that.
All right. Alistair Campbell, what do you think should be done for Scotland?
Well,
we've removed your kilt, by the way.
OK, thank you. But, I mean, just to answer the question directly, I agree it's not inevitable, but I think it's far more likely as a result of what's happened. And I think that one of the big steps on that, I regret to say, I think it was the day after the referendum, when David Cameron went out on the steps of Downing Street, when I think it should have been a time for healing, for saying that he didn't want to be the Prime Minister of a country where 45% of the people wanted to leave the UK, And instead of healing at that time, he played the game of English votes for English laws. I think that
Not
helped.
a game.
I think that helped the SNP. I agree with Francis. The SNP have fought a superb campaign going over many years. They really believe in independence, and you can't criticise them for that. It's what they really believe in. And I think, I'm afraid, it has become more likely because the response of the Conservative Party has been to exploit the rise of the SNP, to damage us in Scotland, which is done, and also to damage us in the Labour-Tory marginals. And I'm not criticising them for that as a campaign tactic, but that's what's happened. I think it was a dangerous game.
What should be done now? What do you think should be done?
Well, I think the other thing that I found distasteful, excuse me, is this idea that these Scottish MPs are somehow less legitimate than English and Welsh and Northern Irish MPs coming down. They've got to be treated with respect. And they now have a very, very strong voice. They have stood up for something different, very different to what the Conservative Party and the Conservative government will represent. They failed in their bid to, quotes, lock out the Tories. That was partly, I think, their fault and partly our fault. But the reality is, joking about kilts aside, I was born in England, but I feel 100% Scottish. My family is 100% Scottish. My family is divided about this. All families in Scotland were divided during the referendum. When David Cameron, as an act of leadership, should have tried to bring the country together, he tried to fight Scottish nationalism with English nationalism, and it was a dangerous, silly game.
Paddy Ashdown, what do you think should be offered to Scotland?
Well, let me first of all address the point that Alistair addresses, I think, extremely accurately. Look, that speech by Mr Cameron was, I think, one of the most dangerous and egregious speeches made by a Prime Minister of the whole of the United Kingdom. Because to have treated that vote in that way in the referendum released the genie from the bottle. And then, I think, it was probably the single speech which has more damaged or placed at jeopardy the Union than any other single speech made by a British Prime Minister, certainly in my lifetime and arguably ever. And the consequence of that is that you had the second rise of the SNP. Many who voted no felt themselves repudiated, felt themselves betrayed, and they joined the SNP.
And these were simply the words English votes, or English votes for English.
Exactly. Instead of saying, we understand and accept and recognise the sovereign will of the Scottish people and the wishes that are going to be there, and we will now give Devo Max. And then the irony of it, having released this genie himself, inadvertently, I'm bound to say, he is then able to use that, and has used that fear, to drive votes into his own ballot box, only compounds that evil. So the answer to your question is yes, I'm afraid it is. We are now more in danger of that. And I also make the point that, you know, if you repudiate with derision the settled will of any nation, the Scottish nation, in choosing who their representatives would be, which I think the kind of fear generated by Mr Cameron during the election campaign did, then you will find in consequence that that nation will move towards independence. So how we deal with this now is absolutely crucial. We must acknowledge and respect, as Alistair has said, the success of the SNP, that they now speak overwhelmingly for Scotland, and find the way to accommodate that. I can't agree with John Swinney's views, but I respect his party's success, and I respect that they reflect the Scottish people's views at this moment. Devo Max is the right way to go, but a quality of recognition and respect from this government, having so misused this issue so far to fill their own ballot boxes, is now what is required, and if that is not provided, then I think our union is at risk.
How can we use the energy that's come out of the SNP and the vote in Scotland, that fresh energy, that momentum, and infuse it into the Parliament, into this new Parliament? And what can each of the parties take from that to themselves to re-energise and re-engage with people in that dynamic way?
John Swinney.
I think the lady hits the nail on the head. Scotland, I love living in Scotland. You won't be surprised to hear me saying that. I'm deeply devoted to my country. But the place is absolutely buzzing, and it has been for months running up to the referendum and since the referendum. And this election campaign, we've had a much higher turnout in Scotland in the general election campaign. The debate has been vigorous, it's been engaged. As a political party representative, getting folk out of their houses to vote yesterday was a doddle by comparison to what it normally is like, because people were moved to participate, and that's what the referendum debate is generated.
Is that because of wanting independence? Is that because they felt that, as you do, that independence should now...
It's actually the point the lady has made about the fact that this is the referendum debate has engaged people more in the political process than they have previously been engaged. What did that, David, was the fact that people were faced in September with a really big choice, a big issue. And there were firm views, yes, and firm views, no's, and people changed their minds and they swithered and they settled on their position. But it was a big question that motivated 85% of us to come out and vote in the referendum.
Leaving that aside, you now have 56 MPs in the new House, and Paddy Ashdown was saying this is a voice that's got to be listened to. What would you like to happen for Scotland? Do you want fiscal independence? What are you hoping that David Cameron will offer? I don't know the word offer or give Scotland, but will provide for Scotland under the arrangement, the vow and all the rest of it. What would you like to see?
What we set out in our manifesto was the fact that we wanted to see the full implementation of what the Smith Commission had actually recommended.
Just for the sake of people who haven't read it all through, which most haven't, what exactly do you want?
Well, the Smith Commission report covered a whole range of topics in relation to the devolution of some welfare responsibilities, income tax responsibilities, some wider tax responsibilities, powers over employment services, a whole variety of different questions. And we want to see that implemented.
Do you want you're dealing with the heart of the issue. Do you want the freedom to raise your own income tax and spend it the way you want?
And that's included in the Smith Commission
proposal. That's what you would like
to
see? Right.
And what we've also set out in our manifesto is our desire to move towards a situation where the Scottish Parliament is in control of all of the revenues and expenditure within Scotland, but we appreciate that would have to take place over time, and in the interim, the type of powers we would want to seek to strengthen the Smith Commission proposals is powers to strengthen the economic performance of Scotland and to create new economic...
But just to clarify that would be the end of the Barnett formula. There'd no longer be a subsidy from England to Scotland. I know you don't think it's a subsidy, but there would be no longer more money spent per head in Scotland by the Westminster government than there is in England.
What fiscal autonomy would give us the power to do would be to control all tax raised in Scotland, all expenditure on public services, and give us the powers to improve our economic performance, which is crucial to the whole debate. Can I make a couple of points?
Can I hold you for a moment? Let's just hear from one or two members of the audience. I'll come back to you. You said that.
I'd like to talk about what Paddy and Al said, because I agree with a lot of what they said.
With respect to the panel, the momentum for independence was there long before David Cameron made his comments on Downing Street steps. It's a country with the feeling of national identity that Scotland has can only live with an irrelevant government for so long. There are more pandas in Scotland than there are Tory MPs. Whatever you think of the Tory policies, that's a fact.
Okay. And you at the back.
Yes, it's not just the ill-judged comments of David Cameron. It's the mess of the Labour Party in Scotland. They've been a mess for years. We've had substandard MSPs. The best of them stayed down in London. The Labour Party were so arrogant, they thought because they held the baton when we crossed the line and got some devolution, that they'd given us this. They hadn't. They were just holding the baton, and the arrogance of the Labour Party in Scotland.
And is your view that independence for Scotland is now inevitable as a result of what's happened? Is that your view?
I think hopefully yes now. I think that the problem we had before was that we believed the two main parties, and now we don't believe them anymore.
Okay. And the woman there with her hand up. Yes, you, with the spectacles. Oh, it's the man behind.
It's the man.
Yeah, come on. Far away.
Well, we shouldn't forget that for the past quarter century, the Labour politicians in Scotland have undermined the legitimacy of the Westminster Parliament. I recall many times Robin Cook and other politicians in Scotland queried the legitimacy of laws passed in London that they would not apply in Scotland. So Labour shares a large degree of burden for stirring the pot and for undermining the legitimacy of parliamentary laws.
Julie, you come in, I'll bring you back. Brilliant.
Well, I think a lot of people outside Scotland as well as inside Scotland like the SNP because it does what it says on the tin. We know exactly where you stand, we know what you're going to do, which is perhaps more than we can say for a number of other political parties in our country. But do I think that independence is is inevitable? I think not inevitable, but more likely. But I don't think we could be in a situation where, after the decision last September, we have a referendum every Thursday until you get the result you want. The people of Scotland spoke. They spoke very clearly, 85% turnout, and they said what they wanted. However, I do think that we are going to move towards a federal system with Devo Max and the fiscal independence. But in return for that, why are we always talking about Scotland? Why don't we talk about England? In return for that, England needs its own parliament as well.
I'll bring you all back. I'll bring you in. Francis Mort, answer that point if you would.
Well, I think it's an important point. I don't favour an English Parliament, but there is a sense of unfairness, which was not unleashed by David Cameron in the aftermath. Just let me finish, Paddy. It was not unleashed by David Cameron. You know, the energy that in the Scottish political system was raised during the independence referendum. Before David Cameron made that speech about the answer to the West Lothian question, which was raised, I remind Alistair, by a Labour MP more than 30 years ago and has remained unanswered since. But that energy and the high turnout happened before that, and actually all that David Cameron was doing is saying, yes, there is an answer to the legitimate Scottish demands for greater autonomy and greater independence.
But actually there needs to be... There needs to bring the country together.
Well, I think if you want to actually to have a chance of holding it together and avoiding there being exactly what Julia rightly points out, which is a sense of English grievance,
which you've exploited during this campaign,
particularly in the north of England. No, we didn't exploit it. We were hearing this spontaneously on the doorstep. People were raising this, a real concern.
All right,
and you're kidding yourself, Alistair, if you think that this was all somehow whipped up by the politicians.
Nobody said that.
I agree with what Alistair's observation, that when David Cameron came out onto the steps of Downing Street at 7 o'clock in the morning after the referendum and moved the debate onto English votes for English laws, I thought he behaved abominably towards his partners, his Labour and Liberal partners in the Better Together campaign, because he essentially squandered that agreement that they had reached.
Exactly.
And he did nothing to essentially address the underlying issues. And then the second thing, which I think was terrible, was that during the referendum, people in Scotland were told by David Cameron and by others that we should stay in the United Kingdom. We were much loved in the United Kingdom. We'd be a lot worse off if we weren't part of the United Kingdom. The UK would be worse off without Scotland. And then during this election campaign, David Cameron insulted the possible choices that Scottish voters might make to elect people like, well, my colleagues, who have just elected 56 of them to the House of Commons. And David Cameron suggested these representatives weren't good enough or weren't equal enough to be members of the House of Commons. And that was a contradiction to what he said during the referendum campaign, and it was an insult to Scotland, and frankly, he got the result from the people of Scotland that he asked for by those remarks.
I'm going to stop you. We only have an hour for question time tonight. We've got questions about the Liberal Democrats, we've got questions about the Labour Party, and I want to keep moving because I think it's only fair that everybody should have a say, indeed, questions about the Conservative Party. I want to get a question by Andy Bass, please. It may be that some of this gets caught up in what we were talking about Scotland. Andy Bass, indeed, this one does.
Is Labour too right-wing for Scotland and too left-wing for England?
Is Labour too right-wing for Scotland? Too left-wing for England? Alistair Campbell.
Well, this election has thrown out a lot of very, very uncomfortable questions for and to the Labour Party from the public, north, west, south and east. I don't think it's as simple as that. I've never bought into the myth that Labour... Can I just go back to the gentleman who said about Labour in Scotland? Because I accept a lot of what you say. I think that where you've had massive majorities piling up year after year after year, where you've had some MPs who've bothered with their constituencies and others that haven't, I think some of those have paid the price, whilst meanwhile the SNP has been moving into that space totally legitimately and exploiting it. And the lesson for the Labour Party in Scotland, or one of the lessons, is if you take the electorate for granted, if you think they're going to vote for you just because they live there and just because they always have, eventually they're going to come back and bite you, and that's happened.
And in England?
I think in England, you see, the reason why I do feel that David Cameron and the Tory party have exploited this for, as Paddy says, to drive up their vote. And there's nothing wrong with that in campaigns. They've had a strategy. They've had a strategy on their campaign, which is to focus on the economy and on leadership. Following the referendum, I think, to be honest, I think none of us thought it was going to lead to this, but it has. Following the rise of the SNP during the campaign, I think the Conservatives saw an opportunity to damage us further in Scotland and help the SNP, and to, by delegitimising the SNP in England, make people in England concerned that John and his hordes were going to come down and basically slap Ed Miliband around the face and tell him what to do. And that's the caricature that's driven
So it wasn't
campaign.
Ed Miliband and the policies of the Labour Party that were at fault and led you to fall so far behind?
There's no single reason why we did so badly. We did badly for lots of reasons. And I think we've got to move away from this kind of Blairite, Brownite, New Labour, Old Labour. The Labour Party has now got to have a fundamental reassessment of who we are, what we believe in, what we stand for, how we're going to face the future. Stop living in the past as we've done. I'm not talking about rerunning New Labour. Yes, you need a good leader. Yes, you need a strong strategy. Yes, you need a good team. Above all, you need ideas and policies that fit your values and fit the priorities of the people. And we're a long way from that, and that's why we've been rejected.
Woman at the very back there. Yes, you.
Alistair, you keep talking about the fact that David Cameron came out after the referendum and talked about English votes for English laws. If it's OK for the SNP to consider the interest of the Scottish people, it's OK for Plaid to consider the interest of the Welsh people, who is considering the interest of the English people? It doesn't seem anybody is.
Paddy Ashton, do you want to answer that? We've got to keep this moving around the table. Paddy, what do you answer to?
Well, yes, I wouldn't mind going back in the Labour Party, but because I thought Alistair was extremely clear, and by the way, I think absolutely right. Look, can I just answer your question in this fashion? I'm a patriot, which means I love my country without having to hate any other. I've spent all my life fighting destructive nationalism. I mean no insult to John Swinney, who is a very fine man, or indeed the SNP, when I say that there are echoes of the Scottish debate that I have heard from the SNP, which I think are very close, not the party at the top, not all of them, but some of them, to a kind of destructive nationalism that worries me. And what now worries me is I see the same thing developing in our country. We now have an English nationalism, a destructive form of English nationalism building up. And that's what worries me most. And that is the genie that Mr. Cameron, I agree, unwittingly unleashed. He did not create the SNP. Of course he didn't. The SNP is a proud party that's gone on for a very long time. But he did give it a huge boost. SNP Mark II was launched when, instead of standing up and honouring the promises that were made to the Scottish people about Devomax after the referendum, he switched the debate immediately, as though we were going to sweep that under the carpet and move towards an English devolution. And that's what created it.
Nobody has come out and said that nationalism in any form is dangerous. SNP,
no,
UKIP,
I didn't say that.
BNP,
I didn't say that. Forgive me, I didn't say that. Nationalism can shift to a kind of destructive nationalism.
And
I have
think
seen
that's
it.
what we've got with the SNP. They want to break up the
I might
union.
I might argue that's
destructive.
I might argue. I deliberately do not say that about the main body of the SNP. Only about some voices.
Paddy,
but I do say it about UKIP.
She said it, and John Swinney, you perhaps would reply, destructive and wants to break up the UK.
Well, what our political ideology is about enabling the people of Scotland to determine their own constitutional, political and economic future. That's what I'm in politics to do. And that is to enable and empower the people of Scotland to take their decisions. Now, why we were successful in the election just yesterday, my goodness, it feels like an age ago, but it's just yesterday, was because we had absolute clarity in our message. It happens also to have been fabulously well explained by Nicola Sturgeon, our party leader.
Is Labour too right-wing for Scotland? Is that what happened?
I'm just coming to what the...
Let's have extol the virtue of Nicola Sturgeon.
But I know, but you've been saying that. I feel I need to.
Of course. But I mean, everybody's talking about the campaign they've fought and either lost or won. Let's not talk about that. Let's move the debate on a bit.
But the point that, and it answers your question about the profile of the Labour Party, we had a very clear anti-austerity message, which we said to people in Scotland, vote for us and we will get a strong voice for Scotland at Westminster to end austerity. And
we said vote for you and you get a Tory government, and that's what we've got.
No, but what my point is, Alistair, if you'd taken a line which was a firm, hard, principled line to end austerity, not the wishy-washy Tory light that we got from the Labour Party, you might have got on a bit better in England than you actually got on.
The woman here, the woman there, yes.
Maybe instead of it being the fact that people think that the Labour aren't
far left enough or far right enough. It's simply that they didn't believe some things that Ed Miliband said. They didn't believe that he wouldn't go into coalition with the SNP. They didn't believe his vagaries of his plan in terms of where all the money was coming from. And so they didn't feel that there was going to be strong government provided by Labour this time.
Briefly, Alistair, if you would.
Well, there's lots of reasons why people rejected us, both in Scotland and in England. I mean, I do think that Scotland now is going to have real difficulty if it does get full fiscal autonomy. We won't get into that now. But just about Ed Miliband, I thought he actually emerged with a lot of credit and a lot of dignity in the campaign. But elections, an old cliche, they're not won in weeks, they're not won in days, they're won in years. One of the big mistakes that I think we made, whilst we were taking a long time to elect Ed as leader, is that we allowed the Conservatives, who did it, again, brilliantly and strategically, they laid down the line about the mess we inherited, the mess we inherited, the mess we inherited, and we didn't rebut that. And if you've got yourselves, your opponents and the media basically say we single-handedly caused an economic disaster, then it was very difficult to win on the politics of the economy. And
but it's also because you haven't got a narrative. Labour has no central narrative.
I agree with that as well.
Julia Hartley-Burry.
I think it does come down to the narrative, but it comes down to the leadership as well, and that is part of the Labour Party being perhaps too left-wing certainly for southern England, if not for northern England. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that Ed Miliband was not the first choice yesterday for the vast majority of the British electorate. He wasn't the first choice for the majority of Labour MPs in 2010. He wasn't the first choice for the majority of Labour Party members in 2010. And this, no, but that's the whole point. There are lots of different forms of democracy, as you know, and you had the Electoral College. But the point is the wrong leader was chosen. You know it, everyone in the room knows it, everyone in the country knows it. I imagine even Ed Miliband knows it. I know David Miliband knows it. You can hear him smugly laughing all the way from New York.
I don't think so.
The reality is that what Ed tried to sell was a vision, I think a very 1970s vision of class warfare, of them and us, and nasty, evil bosses, poor victims. I don't think the vast majority of British people, particularly English people who rejected Labour, view themselves as victims and think of themselves as living in the 1970s, in this them and us existence. I think they want to get on with their lives and move ahead. And I think that narrative was out of touch.
It was broader than that, but what I would agree with is that people know that, if you like, we do have certain values that hopefully will never change. But if you lose aspiration and you lose enterprise and you lose that sense that you understand people who want to get on and do well for themselves, you're not going to win.
All right, the man in spectacles there. You, sir. But no, there are two of you. No, you haven't got spectacles. He really has.
On the SNP being to the left of Labour, if they do get fiscal autonomy, so they have the power for their own spending and taxes, and they can run their own budget deficits, does that mean they will then issue their own debt, which is backed by Scotland, and not guaranteed by the British government, so the English don't have to end up, paying for Scotland?
You know the point well. If Scotland has autonomy, it may find itself in some difficulty financially. Do you want Scotland to have the kind of autonomy that he's talking about?
Well, that's beyond what, as John Swinney was saying, that's beyond what was proposed in the Smith Commission, and would raise all of those issues, which are very difficult issues. And those were some of the issues which actually Scottish people in the independence referendum looked at and decided this was actually too risky and too difficult to do. But just coming back to the original question, I think it was Alistair's old boss, Tony Blair, who nailed it. He said, when Labour fights as a conventional left-wing party, there's a conventional answer, which is that it loses. And, it was in front of the Question Time audience just a week ago, or 8 days ago, when Ed Miliband refused yet again to admit that Labour had got things wrong by spending too much. I think he did sacrifice a huge amount of credibility then. And the answer is...
That's because we'd lost an argument over 5 years.
But it's also because it was true. But because it was true, Alistair. You say that it was somehow the mystical arts of brilliant
It's not mystical arts.
It's not
mystical arts. No,
Francis,
we can go over the financial crash if you want.
Gordon Brown, who what his deficiencies were better than most, he left the country. And to describe them very vividly. But Gordon Brown left the country in a terrible, terrible state.
Right,
and the coalition government had to go right through the process of...
No, nobody else. I want to hear the woman there in the third row.
I think the biggest thing that did for Labour was Rupert Murdoch. If you look at the situation, the biggest winner is Rupert Murdoch. He wanted the SNP in Labour. He told Scotland to vote for the SNP. He wanted Ed Miliband out. where is he now? He wanted the Tories in a majority. Who got the majority?
So it's terribly insulting to
Murdoch's victory.
Can I just deal with this? It is terribly insulting to the British public and electors to suggest
that we have a man like Murdoch who wields so much power thanks to the Conservatives.
Oh, hang on.
Thatcher allowed him to have monopolies.
Have you met Alistair Campbell?
And he's been allowed to take them further and further. It's a disgrace.
Well, all right. She's right. She's right. Come to you, Julia. Now, wait a minute. Let's just stick with this point. Francis Maud and then Julia, and then we'll go on to another question.
It is incredibly patronising to British voters to suggest that Rupert Murdoch wields such power and the British public are so gullible that he can sway huge millions of voters.
Francis
Maud make their own minds up, express their views. They didn't express them until they actually got to the ballot paper, and that's the result.
All right, hold it a minute.
Francis, it is.
No, OK, fine. We've got your point.
Francis.
Now let's hear his point. Francis. And then we'll go to Julia, and then we'll move on.
I don't know about being insulting, but it is incredibly dangerous to the British state that your party has allowed Murdoch a near monopoly on press and broadcasting for far, far too long.
Yeah, hang on,
No,
Julia.
the reality is, actually, that there's no evidence whatsoever that any particular newspaper in any way drives how people vote. Can I point out, though, for 25 minutes of the hour we've got, there really isn't... they've done a lot of research into it. There is no evidence...
Yeah, go on. For 25... please, you've had your say.
For 25 minutes of this hour, we've been discussing... Actually, we've mostly been concentrating on Scotland, which make up 10% of the population. If you wonder why a lot of people are disillusioned in this country about politics, it's because of that.
All right. OK, I'm going to take another question. Before I do, and everybody wants to get in on this, but before I do, question time is going to be in Uxbridge next week. Did Boris Johnson win Uxbridge? Yes, we're in Uxbridge. And the week after,
doesn't turn up.
The week after that, we're going to be in Derby. So to join us, the details are on the screen. I'll give them at the end of the programme as well. James Concannon, please.
Why do the panel think the electorate seems to have punished the Liberal Democrats for the failures of the coalition and rewarded the Conservatives for its successes?
Good question. Paddy Ashdown, why did you take the rap and the Tories benefit from the years of coalition?
I think we have very seriously to consider what the answer to that question is, and I'm afraid this close to such a painful, difficult, humbling and humiliating experience, I'm not sure I'm rationally capable of doing that. Look, we have a... No, I don't need your sympathy. The one thing I don't need is your sympathy. Look, it was very tough, and it was very difficult and frankly very painful, but I'm extremely proud that we stood up for those values that are quintessentially, I think, liberal values, but also the values of Britain: decency, fairness, working with others, putting the national interest first.
So why were you punished for it?
Well, the answer is that is a puzzle. But let me, which I bluntly admit I can't answer.
Well, if you don't want to answer, let me go around the table while you think about the answer.
Allow me.
Hang on.
David, you've put me on the spot here, so let me just pose some questions, if I can.
All right.
The first is this, that if it is the case that a party does what it believes to be in the national interest and gets a result like that last night, whoever is going to dare to act in the national interest again? If it is the case that by working with others in the national interest, in order to, yes, make compromises, but drag this country out of a terrible existential economic crisis, the consequences is last night, whoever is going to do that again? If it is the case that by trying to put forward a policy of hope based on those values of respect and tolerance and fairness and working together, we get what we get last night, and the politics of grievance and fear win over hope, whoever is going to try and do that again? The question is very much for the Liberal Democrats. We suffered last night, but my guess is that British politics suffered too.
Right. So, just in case people have missed the question, Why did the electorate punish the Liberal Democrats for the coalition's mistakes and reward the Conservatives for their successes? And you, of course, took most of your gains in this election from the Liberal Party, who were your partners in coalition. Why did it happen?
Well, I mean, first of all, politicians are never going to get sympathy. And a lot of very decent public servants who did a brave and honourable thing in the Lib Dem party by joining in the national interest with the Conservatives to form a coalition government saw their dreams and hopes shattered last night. And those...
You never said that during the election, ever.
Well,
once. John Major said it,
well,
but
Paddy,
you didn't.
it hadn't happened then. I've lost my seat.
But you knew perfectly well what was
I've lost my seat. I know what it's like. And it's
Not once
people's
did you say
careers...
that we had contributed towards that. Not once. So it's fine to say it now. Thank you, Francis.
Okay, Paddy.
I'm grateful for that.
Okay, Paddy.
John,
Actually,
John, John Major said that, no, but you didn't. And
no, we have said that. We have said that many times. It was the right thing to do. No, we said it many, many times. And I work closely with some Lib Dem colleagues in government.
You were comfortable to
and someone like Danny Alexander I work very closely with, and I'm very sorry that he... You know, I've suffered the same thing myself.
This is terribly like crocodile
really
tears
bad.
to me, Francis.
No, well, I mean, that's a very cynical view, if I may say, Paddy, and untypically...
It's an exceedingly cynical act.
Well, what, to fight an election and hope to win?
No, no. But you might... Look, the question is, why was it that you got the benefit?
Well, can I tell you one reason? Can I suggest a reason why the Lib Dems may have suffered disproportionately? And it is because instead of proclaiming the achievements of the coalition government, Nick Clegg took the unwise strategic decision to separate the Lib Dems from it and actually to claim only credit for the things that they prevented
Francis,
from happening.
never once, never once in the entire campaign, never once,
that was a profoundly
never once in the
campaign.
entire campaign did Nick Clegg repudiate the successes of the coalition. Never once. And if you believe he did, you better show me the quotation.
I'll come to you. Julia Hartley-Brewer.
I hate it when Mummy and Daddy fight. It does feel like a sort of post-divorce Christmas lunch for the first time when Mum and Dad get together, doesn't it? I do have sympathy, actually, because I think people do forget two very crucial things when they punish the Lib Dems at the polls, which is clearly what's happened. And one is that the maths did not add up for a coalition with Labour. In 2010. There was no other option, and people have to stop pretending there was another option.
Exactly
there was no government, or there was a Tory Lib Dem coalition. Get with the programme, that's what happened. The other issue there is that should the Lib Dems not have gone into government at all? We were in a time of huge economic crisis, regardless of whose fault it was. We were in that situation. Should they have just stayed as a sixth form debating society or as a minor pressure group?
Yeah, but what was the punishment? Why did they get punished for it?
I think that they've been punished for having supposedly reneged on their principles and stopped being a pointless pressure group, which is what they were previously, effectively, and over the issue of tuition fees. And again, I am totally flummoxed by this. Who brought in tuition fees? Labour. Who raised tuition fees? Labour. And then who proposed to raise them again? Tories. And who's got punished? The Lib Dems. I don't think it's fair.
Vote Labour.
I find it very hard to sympathise for any Lib Dem politicians or Nick Clegg, because at the end of the day, he is very qualified. All of your MPs are very qualified. They can go and find themselves another job. And I really, really, really want to stress that there is going to be so many people now so many young people who are discouraged from going to university because of how extortionate it is. There are going to be so many poor working families who work really hard, who don't sponge off this state, and they really, really are going to suffer from all of the welfare cuts which we are going to have, and cuts to the public services. And I think we should stop feeling sorry for politicians who are absolutely qualified. They've got the £1 million houses. Life is great. Let's talk about the working people in this country who really, really are going to suffer throughout the next 5 years.
All right, Alistair Campbell. Maybe including your answer to that as well as the other point.
I mean, I agree with a lot of that. I think the reason why the Liberal Democrats suffered more than Conservatives, if I can pay for me a rare compliment to the Tories, is that the Conservatives are and always have been ruthless bastards. And the fact is, they have... It's a compliment.
Well, it's very interesting that Alistair thinks that's a compliment.
Well, there's a modicum of wit in there. But the reality is that the Conservative Party is about power. And that's why, to go back to your question, that's why they were willing, for example, to have the Leveson inquiry, say they were going to do it and then not do anything about it, because they are willing to stay in bed with Murdoch when, to be fair to Ed Miliband, he sacked him off. And then the other thing I would say is that Nick Clegg...
slagged him off.
Yeah. Nick Clegg broke a lot of promises. Yes. David Cameron broke a lot of promises, but Nick Clegg, he did. I mean, I think I have to agree with Francis on this. There came a point where the public was expected to say, there's Clegg and Cameron, they love each other, they're doing it all together. And then suddenly, with a year to go to the election, the Liberal Democrats did start to have this kind of move-away strategy that allowed the Conservatives to do what they called the decapitation strategy, and the decapitation strategy has worked.
All right, John Swinney.
I think I agree with one of the points that Alistair made, that I think what fundamentally did for the Liberal Democrats was that they promised people essentially in 2010 to be anti-Tory. That's how they won most of their seats, as anti-Tories, and then went into bed with the Tories after the election and delivered policies that they said before the election they wouldn't do and then did after the election. So I think there's a fundamental break of promise. But the second thing is that, and this is one example I would offer, I think is illustrative of the difficulty of some of the Lib Dem behaviour in government. Danny Alexander's a minister I had a lot to do with. He's my counterpart in the Treasury, and I have a lot of personal respect for him. The moment he sat beside the Chancellor and nodded his way through the budget on a Tuesday, and then on a Wednesday turned up in the House of Commons to make a statement trouncing, denouncing the contents of the budget and standing with that silly yellow box outside the Treasury, they destroyed their credibility. And I think that is what gets politicians a bad name. You sit there on one day and you nod your head through the Tory cuts, and then somehow you try to separate yourself from the following day. That's hypocrisy.
That is a dreadful, and I'm sure you know, knowingly misrepresenting what happened. We agreed with the budget that was passed through and then proposed our alternative budget after the election. So those are not the same thing. But let me just say this. You may be certain, it'll be tough, it'll be difficult. We've done it before. We will go on fighting for those values. We will, under whatever circumstances. And there's no other party in Britain that will do so. We will return. And I can tell you that already, today actually, 1,000 people have joined the Liberal Democrats because they see what is at risk now if we are not a powerful Liberal force holding the centre ground in our party. We have never, paradoxically, had a better day for recruitment in our party than after what happened last night. Okay. This battle will continue and the Liberal Democrats will return and we will protect those ideals and we will protect the centre ground.
So defeat boosts your numbers. Curious. Anyway,
sometimes it is so.
Let's go on to another question. We've only got a quarter of an hour or so, and we better keep moving. Ral San, please.
Is it fair that UKIP received over 4 million votes yesterday, but only one seat?
Yes, UKIP, well, nearly 3.9 million votes yesterday, and only got one seat. Is this fair? We were going to have a UKIP member on the panel, but as I said earlier, they couldn't provide anybody. But is it fair? John Swinney.
Well, I'm afraid, forgive me if I don't have an awful lot of sympathy for UKIP today. I have absolutely nothing in common with UKIP whatsoever.
But 3.9 million people be represented?
But there is a serious point which underlies this, which is the relationship between the number of votes cast and the number of seats that parties achieve. Now, on the occasion of yesterday, that happens to have benefited my party enormously. I saw some figures, forgive me, I can't remember.
I can give them to you. 27,000 people per seat for the SNP, as against 3.9 million for one seat for UKIP.
That's right.
And that's I think that's a very fair comparison, and that's a product of the first-past-the-post system. It happens to have worked OK, well, very well for my party yesterday, actually, but for most of our previous 70 years of our history, it's not worked very well for us on most occasions. So I think it makes the case for PR in elections. We support PR in elections, and I think it would give us fairer, more representative politics if that was the case. But please don't confuse my support for PR with any sympathy for UKIP on this particular evening.
Francis Maud.
Well, I think if a UKIP representative had been here, I think the UKIP person would have said, no, it wasn't fair, because parties who don't do well under a particular system always think it's fundamentally unfair.
What would you say? It's fundamentally fair?
I think there's a fundamental fairness about a system where the candidate who wins most votes in a constituency wins. That seems to me a reasonably fair way to operate. And, you know, is there any perfectly fair way of running an electoral system? No. There is a fundamental unfairness in our system in that the boundaries do not reflect anything like equality in terms of numbers, so you need many more voters to elect a Conservative MP than a Labour MP. And we had an opportunity to change that, which sadly didn't get through the House of Commons because the coalition failed to retain its solidarity at that point, is the delicate way of putting it, Paddy. And that's capable of being remedied. But so, is there any perfect fairness? No. But actually, you know, I think when parties moan about the system when they fail to win seats in an election, my sympathy gets a bit.
But the people who have possession of the House of Commons will always vote against a system that would eject them from the House of Commons because of proportional representation, wouldn't they say? It is never going to change.
Well, it's never going. Well, I mean, actually, it isn't Parliament that stopped there being a change to the electoral system.
Only on a minor change of AV that was suggested.
Yeah, but even that minor change got overwhelmingly rejected 3-1 by the British public. It wasn't the House of Commons that stopped that happening. It was the British people.
The woman there.
No, because realistically, you're never going to change a system that you do well in. Whether it's democratic or not, the Conservatives will not change the voting system until another government comes in, because you do well in it.
Then they won't change it.
But we did provide a referendum.
Well, but the point is the next government won't change it because, by definition, that system works for them.
Unless it's a coalition,
Paddy.
to make it fairer.
Well, it's interesting, this notion of fairness, isn't it? Because there are lots of different systems, lots of different PR systems. AV seems to me to be the most sensible system that still maintains that link between individual voters and an individual MP in a constituency. And that, as you say, was soundly rejected in
But if you're one of the nearly 4 million people who voted UKIP yesterday, would you not be feeling aggrieved now that you have only one person?
Absolutely. And if I was one of the 2 million who voted SNP, I'd be very chuffed with my 56 seats. But the point is, though...
Well, but
would it be OK if I finished my point, John?
Well, OK, fine.
Would that be OK?
That's how Nicola talks to him.
Yes, exactly.
I wouldn't even dare try to interrupt us.
I think the key thing is, although we're concerned about it right now, I have a funny feeling in a few weeks this won't be top of our list. It won't be in the top 10 of most voters' lists. It won't be the top 100. I don't think it'll be 4,736 on our list. If you're worried about... No, I think no, because the polls show if you're worried about keeping your home, you're worried about keeping your job, getting your kids into a decent school, getting care for your elderly parents, worrying about your pension, all of those things, worrying about a particular political system, but the voting system, you may be interesting to a question time audience. Statistically, on the polling, it's not a top priority.
All right, who said wrong? Sorry, who said wrong?
That's a very good point.
What did you say?
No one believes polling anymore after last night.
Nobody believes polling anymore, no. Except exit polls. Who said wrong? Okay, it was you again.
Yeah,
I don't want to go back to you. The man in red there. You, sir, in the middle. No, in the red shirt.
Labour had 13 years to deal with this issue and did nothing, so what's all this fuss about tonight?
All right. What is the fuss about?
Well, I think the fuss about is in the question, the 4 million votes, one seat. But I think that the lady earlier, you asked about how do you keep that sense of momentum for engagement. People have to stay engaged in politics all the time. Did those 3.9 million people vote yes when they had the chance to change the system? I suspect not, because they thought it didn't matter. And they think it matters today. So we had the chance for through a referendum to change the system. People should stay engaged in the political process, not just once every 5 years.
And they were woken up and they stayed engaged, and that energy has developed and matured. Julie is saying because people remain anxious and worried and concerned about jobs and homes and schools.
No, I don't agree with that.
They won't engage and vote. Actually, I think it's a dreadful position. Keep people undermined, keep them
my point
anxious, and they don't vote.
My point is the chance to change the system.
Perhaps
I agree.
Thank you. Can we just... I need to make the point that fair and representative politics is not just about power share, and there's a really obvious situation that's happened today in the way that we can refresh and regenerate politics. 3 leaders have resigned today, and I look at the political system and there is no one there that represents my background or me. I'm a woman. I'm a woman, I'm from the north, I'm from the LGBT community, I'm working class, and there isn't... all of the leaders do not represent that.
Get involved.
I want to be an MP, and there is no one who I can look up to and like, that woman is like me.
Make it you then.
Yeah,
Get
exactly,
involved.
exactly.
Get engaged.
Have you had a go at this, Paddy?
No, I haven't, but you know, you've just made a brilliant advert for you getting involved. Just brilliant. Well, make your own.
They'll all be asking for your address afterwards, or your email. Email, perhaps the way of putting it.
The Blessed Francis said the Tories didn't wanted to keep the system as they are, as it is. Well, in the famous words of Mandy Rice Davis, he would say that, wouldn't he? Here are the figures. You use 26,000 for SNP, 34 for Conservatives, 40,000 for a Labour seat, 290,000 for a Lib Dem seat, 1.1 million for a Green, and 3.8 million for UKIP. Now, look, the system works roughly, very unfairly, by the way, when you have two-party politics. But it works roughly. Francis Maude is right. You'll produce a Conservative government. Does it give stability? No, because the coalition's inside the Conservative Party. But what it does is it crushes out multi-party politics. But we're now in the era of multi-party politics. What worked approximately in two-party politics will not work if you have multi-party politics. So we have to...
Are we? The voice on my left
Yes,
say,
yes,
Paddy,
you are, because what you now have is multi-party politics, but not in the same country, in different countries. Yep, so Wales is red, Britain is blue, England is blue, London is blue, and Scotland is yellow. Now, you have got to...
Red. London is red.
Scotland is SNP, which is yellow. Right.
Yes.
It is correct.
All right, let's stop the colour.
So,
the colour coding is clearly
in other words,
difficult.
you now have multi-party politics, but not in the same country, but in different nations. And that is exceedingly dangerous. We have now to create an electoral system that you have to now create a multi-party system of election that will give freedom of choice to the people, more power to the voters, and that means you must have electoral reform. Otherwise, what you create...
But that gives more power to a political party.
All right.
Well, it doesn't give more power to the voter.
John,
Paddy
very quickly, John.
Well, Paddy Ashton's back onto the stuff of challenging the conclusions the electorate arrive at. The electorate...
No, he's just saying that in Scotland, Liberal Democrat voters in Scotland are underrepresented at Westminster.
Yes,
that's what he's saying.
And
that's not the point I was making at all.
The point I was rudely trying to make to Julia was the fact that, you know, I'm a beneficiary of this system.
You said that.
Right, but I believe in PR.
Yes,
so it's possible to be a beneficiary and believe in...
All right, fine. Stop, because we have...
We currently are the beneficiary. We currently are the beneficiary of first
We'll take a lot...
But we believe in proportional
Thank you very much, Paddy. I want to take a last question. We've only got 5 or 6 minutes left. It goes to the heart of what is on the agenda for this new Parliament. It's a question from Claire Dunkley.
Can David Cameron keep Britain in Europe?
Can David Cameron keep Britain in Europe? One for the Tories. We know that by 2017 he's offering a referendum. You start on this, Alistair Campbell. Do you think he can?
Well, it's up to the people to keep Britain in Europe because there's going to be a referendum. I hope to God that we do. Again, if I can go back to David Cameron's constant sort of use of tactics and big, bold gestures and all the rest of it, we're having the referendum because of his fears about the rise of UKIP and his fears about the right wing of his party, who are still there in bigger numbers today. The reality is that I think even having the debate is dangerous for Britain. I think that Britain is part of the European Union, should stay part of the European Union, and I think that David Cameron... I think we will stay in Europe because ultimately I think the British people will vote yes.
How come it's dangerous to debate it?
Because I think to have the next 2 years, your party, Francis, you know this, you're going to be plunged into 2 years of internecine warfare about Europe. Yes, you are. About Europe. And yes, David Cameron will probably get some sort of deal to come back, put to the people, and hopefully we'll all vote yes. But I think yes, he can, because I think the people will save him from himself.
All right, the person there, the man there. Yes, quick point from you.
Why is it dangerous to debate something that nearly 4 million people voted for yesterday?
They didn't just vote for that. They voted about immigration, they voted about jobs, they voted about health. Yes, it is.
The United Kingdom Independence Party.
You just watch out for the next 2 years.
Let him have his say. The United Kingdom Independence Party, of which you are a supporter or not?
No, I don't support them, but if 4 million people are saying, voting for the United Kingdom Independence Party,
That's not why we're having the referendum. We're having the referendum because David Cameron has called the referendum.
Francis Maud.
Well, I think it's shocking that Alistair says it's dangerous to debate it. It's far more dangerous not to debate it. It's far more dangerous for there to be a discontent with Britain's relationship within the European Union and try to suppress it. It's much better. I think my quarrel with Claire in her question is not can David Cameron keep Britain, it's do the people want to? And I think what the public want, but we'll ask them, is Britain to be in a European Union, but one which looks and feels different, so that the relationship is different, so that it isn't on a kind of constant ratchet towards ever greater political union, where we get swallowed up. Well, you say that, but actually built into the treaty, Alistair, is the words ever closer union, and that means what it says. And that is fundamentally, I think, what makes people uncomfortable with it, and what makes Britain an uncomfortable partner within the European Union. So I hope there will be a serious renegotiation which will resolve this issue for a generation and make us actually a much more comfortable partner within the European Union, and I think it can
John
be done.
Swinney, are you alarmed at the prospect of a referendum in Britain about a membership of Europe?
I'm certainly alarmed about the possibility of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, and I think what David Cameron can't... What I'm concerned about is that David Cameron can't be guaranteed that the debate around the referendum will be on the terms of the referendum. It could be about other issues, and he could find himself, if his government is ever more unpopular in 2 years' time, facing a referendum, an outcome which is driven by other issues other than the contents of the referendum.
But was that not the case with your referendum?
Well, but
I mean, you have a referendum.
Yeah.
Why can't the rest of Britain have a referendum?
But we took the outcome of the referendum and we accepted it. The difficulty, I think, is a lot of damage could be done to the economic interests of the UK if the referendum goes the wrong way. The other thing
I'm going to have to bring you to a close. We've only got a minute left. Julia, and then I'll come to you, Paddy. Sorry, John.
It never ceases to amaze me, the arrogance of the political classes, that the public are just far too stupid to be allowed to say. I've been a Eurosceptic very openly and proudly for many years, and I'll tell you why. Because
it sells your rag. That's why.
I don't work for any particular newspaper, actually.
The newspapers lie about
Could I finish one point without being interrupted? One point. No, the point is...
But you have to be very quick, otherwise Paddy won't get a go.
For the last few decades, the political classes have been handing over our powers without our permission, without any permission whatsoever, to undemocratic, unelected bureaucrats. And we have a right to say no.
All right, Paddy Ashdown, do you think Cameron will keep...
I think I'm the first party leader ever to have recommended that we should have a referendum if Europe took more powers from Britain a long time ago. So I'm not against referendums. I think the more sensible case is to have one when powers are moved there. But whether you believe that or not, we're now going to get one. In my view, we're going to get it earlier. They'll probably have it in 2016. And then will Mr. Cameron keep Britain in Europe? No, but you will. We'll have a debate in this country, and we'll have a debate that can be won for yes, and then this country will be liberated and to play its full part in Europe, which it should be doing. To have any other choice for our country would be absolutely deadly.
You have five seconds up there. Yeah, but you have 5 seconds. Make your point.
It's just completely ridiculous for Alistair Cameron to sit there telling this lady to get involved in politics and then say we shouldn't have a debate about...
On that note of debate, question time ends. Next week we're going to be in Uxbridge. The week after that we're going to be in Derby. If you want to come to either place, Uxbridge or Derby, you can apply at the website or you can call the number on the screen there, 0330 123 9988. Many thanks to our panel who came here tonight, all exhausted from the aftermath of the campaign, and to our audience here from London. Good night.